Putting some liquid in your mouth that is sweet, so we're talking a glucose solution or some fruit juice, swishing it around for many seconds so that your body gets the message, oh, there's something sweet in this mouth, and then literally spitting it out. Just doing this can increase your performance by 3 to 7% in these short periods of intense exercise of less than 2 hours. Hello angels, and welcome back to the Glucose Goddess Show. My name is Jessie Introspé. I'm a French biochemist, and I'm excited to teach you things about how your body works. I'm going to make science fun, and today we're going to talk about exercise and food. A very common question I get: how should we eat before we exercise? How should we eat after we exercise? Does it matter what type of exercise we're doing? If you're doing endurance, cycling, if you're doing a HIIT class, if you're going for a hike, how do these different exercises inform what you should be eating before to make sure you're performing well and you feel amazing? What are the top mistakes to avoid in the realm of exercise nutrition? Is it better to work out fasted or not fasted? What kinds of exercises burn more fat? Anyway, so many topics. So this topic, I'm actually going to break it down into 2 episodes. This first episode is about how to fuel before, during, and after your workout for optimal performance. And this applies to everybody. You can be an endurance athlete. You can be somebody who just goes to the gym for 30 minutes. You will learn very interesting things in here. The second episode, which I'm releasing right after this one, is about protein intake and how to build muscle mass. So if you're interested in this topic in general, you need these 2 episodes to make sure you have the full picture. And I'm really excited about this topic, and I'm wearing a fun little Dance the Night Away top in honor of exercise and nutrition episodes. So let's get started. Let's start by talking about carbs. So what are carbs? Carbs are starches like bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, and sugars. Anything that tastes sweet, from an apple pie to a chocolate cookie to an orange juice. And so when we eat carbs, something very important happens. Carbs break down into glucose molecules as we digest them and as they enter our bloodstream. Here, when there's a glucose spike, meaning when you eat quite a significant amount of carbs, your body is going to release insulin. Insulin is a hormone released by your liver, and insulin is going to put excess glucose away. And the first place it's going to do that is in your liver. So your liver is an amazing little reservoir or storage unit for excess glucose. Now, our liver turns this excess glucose into glycogen. So glycogen is just lots of molecules of glucose attached together, hand to hand like this. Our liver can hold about 100 grams of glycogen. That's about the amount of glucose in 2 large fries. And that's about half of the amount of glucose that your body needs per day to function. The second storage unit that our body uses when the liver is full and when there's still excess glucose to put away is our muscles. Our muscles are the most amazing storage units for excess glucose because we have so many muscles. Our muscles can hold about 400 grams of glucose as glycogen, which is the amount of glucose in 7 large fries. And then, when the liver and the muscles are full, any excess glucose is going to be stored in our fat cells. And our body has the ability to grow the number and the size of our fat cells in order to store excess glucose. Now, not everybody can actually put on a lot of fat cells, and so this has implications for your metabolic health. But basically, you have liver as the first storage unit for glucose, then you have muscles, and then you have your fat cells. So our body is always storing energy when we eat. And when we don't eat, what happens? Our body needs to find some energy to use. So your body turns to these various stores of energy to grab this energy and use it for what it needs to be doing. And whether your body is burning the glycogen in your muscles and in your liver, or whether it's burning the fat in your fat cells. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention, so when glucose is stored in your fat cells, it's stored as fat, not as glycogen. So whether your body is using fat for fuel or glucose in the form of glycogen for fuel has a direct impact on your performance, on your exercise and athletic performance. And generally, and we're going to get into so much detail about this, generally, when you're doing something that is low intensity, your body is going to burn fat for fuel. And then when you're doing something explosive or quite difficult, your body is going to burn glucose for fuel, because turning glucose into fuel is faster than turning fat into fuel. Now, to measure the intensity of an exercise, we can use heart rate or we can use VO2 max. So VO2 max is something that gets measured if you do a test like on a treadmill for something, hooked up to a machine, and I did this, I'm going to show you the results in a sec, or some smartwatches can actually measure it quite well and quite accurately. Basically, your VO2 max is a measure of how well your body's able to use oxygen to make energy and to burn fuel from within. So the higher your VO2 max, the harder you're exercising. So I'm going to show you my exact VO2 max and CPET results. Essentially, the way it worked is that I was on a treadmill attached to this big machine, and I had a mask on, and I had to run starting at low intensity. I had to run faster and faster and faster. And the machine not only measured my VO2 max, but also measured what fuel my body was burning at different intensities. So on this graph, you see the following. I'm going to explain. So when you see the white bars, that's my body that's burning fat. And when you see the green bars, that's my body burning glucose. In the x-axis, you see my heart rate. So all the way to the right, 191, that's my 100% max heart rate. And then all the way to the left, this is important, my heart rate starts at 129, which is not my resting heart rate. So this graph doesn't show you what I'm burning for fuel when I'm walking. Basically, 129, I'm already at 65% of my max heart rate. So it's like a light jog. So this graph shows everything from a light jog to a full-on sprint when my max heart rate is happening. And as you can see, what's really interesting is that the more intense the exercise is, the more I'm burning just glucose. At the beginning, I'm burning a bit of a mix of both. And then as it gets harder and harder and harder, as you can see, the amount of fat in white that I'm burning goes down. And in proportion, my body's just burning glucose for fuel. So knowing your VO2 max is very important for what we're going to talk about. If you don't know your VO2 max, you can use your heart rate. I'm going to be saying things like, this is exercising at 40% of your max heart rate. This is exercising at 60, at 85%. So it's quite important to understand what your max heart rate is. And to measure your max heart rate, it's very easy. The calculation is 220 minus your age. So if you're 20 years old, your max heart rate is 220 minus 20, it's 200. If you're 40 years old, it's 180, etc., etc., etc. So take a sec to measure your max heart rate right now so we can know what we're talking about. Time for a quick break to tell you about the supplement I have developed, Anti-Spike Formula. Now listen, in my years of research, I've understood one key thing. Keeping our glucose levels steady is the foundation of physical and mental health, no question. And if I could only take one supplement for the rest of my life to help me reduce my glucose spikes and keep my glucose levels steady, it would be Anti-Spike Formula. I created Anti-Spike with two really powerful natural plant molecules in it. The first one is mulberry leaf extract. And listen to this. In a review study of 12 randomized clinical trials on over 600 people, scientists found that mulberry leaf extract significantly reduces our glucose spikes after a meal by up to 40%. It also significantly reduces our insulin spike after a meal by up to 40%, and it reduces our fasting glucose levels by 8 milligrams per deciliter after just 2 months. So this molecule from mulberry leaf reduces the absorption of glucose in our bloodstream. It actually slows down how quickly starches turn to glucose in our bloodstream, therefore creating a massive reduction in the glucose spike of our meal. The second main molecule in anti-spike formula is a molecule from lemon called eriocytrine. It's the molecule that makes lemons yellow, but it also has a really cool effect on our gut. It basically helps our gut produce more GLP-1. Clinical trials show us that GLP-1 production increases by 17% after just 2 months of taking it. More GLP-1 means healthier glucose levels. I take 2 capsules of anti-spike formula every single day before the meal of my day highest in carbs and sugars. So go to antispike.com to see all the science behind these ingredients, to see testimonials from thousands of people who've tried it, and to order your own anti-spike formula bottle and try it for yourself. And essentially, max heart rate and max VO2 max are equivalent. So if we say like this exercise is at 60% of your VO2 max, it's going to be somewhat equivalent to saying this exercise is at 60% of your max heart rate. Now, in terms of VO2 max, if you've ever had the opportunity to measure it, it's quite cool because, again, as I was saying, it's a good measure of your overall fitness. So mine is 63 ml per minute per kilo, which I'm really happy about. That's a good result. I'm going to try to keep, and I'm 32, so I'm going to try to keep that going for my whole life, maybe increase it. But this is something I'm looking at a lot to make sure that as I age, my body stays really, really fit and healthy. So let's look exactly at what happens when we're exercising. So by default, when we're exercising, that means we're using our muscles for movement, right? We're contracting our muscles. Exercise is the use of our muscles to create movement. So your body and your muscles have 2 sources of fuel they can use: fat and glucose. And importantly, there are different sources of this fat and of this glucose. So in this animation, you can see that there are some sources of fuel that come from inside the muscle. Here you see in purple, that is glycogen, so glucose that is stored inside the muscle that can be used for fuel. And then you also see in white here, this is fat that is stored within a muscle that can be used for fuel. And now, fuel can also come from outside of our muscles, essentially from our bloodstream. So the things that come from outside our muscle are glucose from our blood, here in red. The glucose in our blood is released from the liver, or it's taken as we eat food. Remember, when you eat carbs, they break down into glucose molecules, and the first place they go is our bloodstream. So here what you're seeing in red is glucose coming from the bloodstream, either from food you're eating right now or from stored glucose in your liver. And you can also see here in yellow that in your bloodstream, your blood can also transport fat from your fat reserves. And this is in yellow. This can also be used by your muscles for fuel. And this is important because in a second, we're going to talk about eating carbs while we're exercising. And if you're eating carbs while you're exercising, like literally as the exercise is happening, well, then potentially glucose is going to be in your bloodstream because you're eating and it goes to your bloodstream in a matter of minutes. And then that glucose could be used by your muscles for fuel. So just remember this, okay? So let's get into details and examples of various exercises. The first exercise type I want to talk about is what I call the chill exercise. So this is exercising at 50% of your max VO2 or of your max heart rate. And at 50% of your max heart rate, you're basically hiking with a friend and you're talking. You're doing very easy cycling along a river or something. You could be talking to somebody else. At 50%, you don't feel like you're exercising very hard. This is something that you can sustain for 5 minutes or for 4 hours. It's chill. This is the chill exercise category. So what's going on when you're doing this kind of chill exercise? Well, the studies show us that in this case of chill exercise, we're going to be relying mostly on fat and on blood glucose to fuel our muscles. So here's an example from a wonderful study. The study is called Intramuscular Triacylglycerol Glycogen and Acetyl Group Metabolism during 4 hours of moderate exercise in man. I love the in man. Okay, so In this study, scientists asked participants to ride a bicycle at 55% of their max heart rate for 4 hours. And again, at this 50 or 55% of max heart rate, you're not getting lactic acid buildup, you're not getting cramps, it's not uncomfortable. You can just, maybe it's a bit boring for some people, but you can keep going, you're fine. And this graph shows us in the first 2 hours of the exercise and in the last 2 hours of the exercise, what is the fuel that their muscles are using? So as you can see from this graph, in the graph representing the fuel used in the first 2 hours of the exercise, basically we're burning fat from the bloodstream, glucose from the muscle, and glucose in the blood. And in the last 2 hours, the fat burning has massively taken over. And this is fat being released from your fat cells. So generally, here you see, even in the first 2 hours, quite a lot of fat being used. And then after a long time at this moderate intensity, there's a lot of fat being used and also glucose from your bloodstream. So why does this matter? Because this shows us that at low intensity, up to 60% of the fuel that we're burning is from our fat reserves. And this is amazing because, again, we have a ton of fat reserves. Essentially, to give you some clear examples, every pound of fat on your body could allow you to walk at this chill intensity for 12 hours nonstop, just in terms of how much energy they contain. And of course, you might say, well, Jessie, we still see in this graph that our body is still using glucose, still using glycogen. Like, yes, of course, your liver is still gonna be releasing glucose into your bloodstream so you can use it. But here's the deal. If you were purely relying on glucose and glycogen for fuel, you would not be able to go past a few hours, okay? Because you would run out really quickly. So the fact that up to 60% of the energy is coming from the fat is allowing you to sustain for a really, really long time, this moderate level of exercise. So if you're going for a long walk, a hike, if you're dancing at chill intensity, if you're doing moderate exercise, the answer here is you don't need snacks. You don't need to be eating while you're doing it in terms of performance, right? Your body has everything it needs in its fat reserves. This is actually a good message for me because when I go on a hike with my friends, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna bring some snacks because everybody loves snacks on a hike. But I know that these snacks are more for my enjoyment and my pleasure than they actually are for my performance on the hike, because on the hike, again, my body is burning mostly fat for fuel. So I don't need to be eating that chocolate bar. And if your goal is fat burning, you should also know that working at this moderate intensity is going to burn more fat for fuel than doing higher intensity works that are wonderful and have other great consequences, but are not going to burn so much fat for fuel. Now, common question, should you work out fasted on an empty stomach? You guys know I've been doing my glucose hacks religiously. They are the foundation of my dietary habits, but adding the molecules and anti-spike has really allowed me to get to the next level in a few areas. One, bloating. I didn't even know that I would get bloated. With anti-spike, I'm like, oh, I used to get bloated. I feel so much better now. 2, energy levels, super consistent. Eagle energy all day. And 3, cravings for sugar. I love sugar. I want to eat chocolate all the time. And anti-spike has given me a feeling of having a total superpower when it comes to my sugar cravings. I don't feel controlled by them anymore at all. It's truly amazing. And I know that these natural molecules are going to help my long-term fasting glucose and fasting insulin levels, which is so key to physical and mental health and to healthy aging. So go to antispike.com to see all the science behind these ingredients, to see testimonials from thousands of people who've tried it, and to order your own anti-spike formula bottle and try it for yourself. At this moderate amount of intensity, working out fasted is fine because even though your blood glucose might go down a little bit as your muscles are using some of the glucose in your bloodstream, as I just explained, your body's mostly burning fat for fuel, so you're gonna be fine. However, if you're female, just remember that any kind of exercise fasted, especially if it lasts a long time, can be a little bit stressful for your body. So do what feels right to you. Don't feel like you have to work out fasted. You don't at all. Just think about your personal preference and what you actually like to do. Now, important topic. Let's discuss Oh, that chair made some noise. Let's discuss metabolic flexibility. So some people are unable to burn fat for fuel, even at low intensities. The studies show us that some people just burn glucose. Their body is not able to burn fat for fuel. And this is called being not metabolically flexible. And being metabolically flexible means your body is able to switch from burning glucose to fat very efficiently. And this is actually a very key marker of your overall health. We should all strive to be metabolically flexible and to be able to burn fat for fuel. So what's a sign that you are not metabolically flexible? You're hungry all the time, you want to snack all the time, and you're not able to walk an hour. Feels too exhausting, like you can't do it. Those are signs that you're not metabolically flexible. So how do we train our body to become metabolically flexible? The good news is it's not super hard. The way you train your body to become metabolically flexible so you can burn fat for fuel is by reducing the amount of glucose spikes that we experience. Because as we steady our glucose levels, our body no longer depends on these big spikes of incoming glucose in our bloodstream. My hacks are a very good place to start to increase your metabolic flexibility. And this will help you in so many ways, right? It'll help you with cravings, with energy, with not being hungry all the time. So if this is a goal of yours, there's a PDF linked in the description of this episode with my 10 glucose hacks that are gonna help you get there really easily. So before we go on to what to eat during intense exercise, I just want to mention one thing. So one of my hacks is moving after eating. And it says, essentially, anytime you eat carbs or sugars, a good thing to do afterwards is to go on a walk or move a little bit to allow your muscles to use some of that glucose for fuel. So we don't have to eat a cookie when we go on a hike, but if we're going to eat a cookie during the day at some point, the best moment to do so would be before that hike, so that as you're hiking or doing another moderate intensity activity, your muscles will use up the glucose from that cookie for energy instead of letting it hang around and create a big spike. So even though at moderate intensity exercise, you're burning a lot of fat, your body is still gonna be looking for some glucose in your bloodstream to complete. So here's an example. For example, having a pain au chocolat on its own, big glucose spike, and then having a pain au chocolat and then doing 10 minutes of calf raises, which are my favorite sedentary exercise to do. Basically, you just sit at your desk and you just do calf raises like this for 10 minutes because your calf muscles are very good at soaking up glucose from your bloodstream. That's a fun little thing you can do. Another example, donut on its own versus donut and then vacuuming. Vacuuming is also exercising, and as you can see, your muscles are using up a lot of the glucose in that donut to do the vacuuming, therefore smaller glucose spike, and therefore that's better for you. Now I'm going to talk about 85% VO2 max, or 85% of your max heart rate. These are difficult exercises. Some examples of things that reach 85% VO2 max or 85% max heart rate. Sprinting or running at a fast pace like a 5K or a 10K. High intensity interval training, like a 1 hour class where you're doing like a boot camp and it's super intense. You know, like when you do like 30 seconds of sprints and then you stop and then you start again. Cycling at a vigorous pace, especially if you're doing hills or interval sessions. Swimming at a race pace. Rowing at high power output, where you're pushing yourself really close to your max. And then anything that's like a CrossFit or a circuit style gym class, that's also going to be really high and around the 85% VO2 max. So let's look at a new study now. This is a 2020 study called Regulation of Fat Metabolism During Exercise. And as you can see, we have another graph here that's looking at where does the fuel come from. So in this study, the scientists requested that the participants do cycling at 25% VO2 max, which is the left graph here, cycling at 65% VO2 max for 2 hours, or 85% VO2 max for 30 minutes. Oh, and the 25% was also 2 hours. So we have 2 hours, 2 hours, 30 minutes at 25, 65, or 85% VO2 max. So 65% is more chill. 85% VO2 max is close to a sprint. That's why you can only do it for 30 minutes and not 2 hours. But it's quite hard. It's not 100%, but it's still pretty hard. So Again, here, look at the colors. We have white. This is fat from within your muscle. We have yellow. This is fat from your bloodstream, from your fat cells. We have purple. This is glucose from your muscles. And we have red. This is glucose from your bloodstream, from something you've just eaten, or from your liver that is releasing glucose into your bloodstream. So what do we see from this amazing study? We see that at low intensity, like we saw earlier, the cyclists mostly rely on fat for fuel. As you can see, that graph is mostly yellow, which is fat from your bloodstream, from your fat cells. Fueling the low intensity exercise makes sense. We understood that already. Fat is a great source of fuel when you're doing moderate, low intensity exercise. Then, at 65%, things start shifting drastically. And as you can see, once we get to 85%, the muscles are mostly burning glucose. So you see in blue, muscle glycogen being burned, and then in red, a lot more glucose from the bloodstream being burned. Now here is the big problem that we're going to talk about right now. If at 85% VO2 max, your body is relying on glycogen and on glucose from your bloodstream, it's an issue because that source of energy runs out. As I explained, you can only store about 500 grams of glycogen in your muscles and your liver total, but at 85% VO2 max, you're burning like 150 grams of glycogen per hour. So essentially, as you can kind of see here, your blood sugar is going to start dropping, your body's going to sense that glucose levels are getting low, so it's going to reduce how much you're able to push during this exercise. And after 3 hours, those reserves of glucose are out. And the thing is, it's not like you can push really, really hard for 3 hours until your glycogen reserves are gone. No, as your glycogen reserves decrease, your body is going to reduce how much you can push. It's not going to allow you to push max out for 3 hours and then you just drop. No. It's a curve, right? So you're going to go really fast in the beginning, really good performance, and then it's going to get lower and lower and lower and harder and harder and harder. So at high intensity, your body needs glucose in the bloodstream and from glycogen reserves. And so now we get to the very important topic of what should you eat during a high intensity, prolonged endurance exercise. So it was only in the 1980s that scientists first discovered that eating during prolonged exercise of higher intensity could be helpful. And what are we supposed to eat? Well, carbs, because carbs turn to glucose, and that is what your muscles are needing at this high level of intensity. So the recommendations have been very broad for a long time. They've been like, oh, have 30 to 60 grams of carbs per hour of exercise. But they're not taking anything into account, like what kind of exercise you're doing, what kind of carbs you should be having. It was just kind of the general recommendation, but now we know better. How many carbs can you actually be eating as you're cycling and you're running? And how many of those can be assimilated and then burnt directly for fuel by your muscles? That was the question. So we're going to look at that in just 1 second with some really interesting research I'm super excited to share. But what you should know is if you're doing intense prolonged exercise, you need to make sure your glycogen reserves are full. And that's why the recommendation is usually something along the lines of make sure the day before you're eating a lot of carbs. We're not talking like bad for you carbs like cookies and ice cream. We're talking rice, pasta, bread, potatoes. Make sure all the glycogen reserves in your muscles and in your liver are really, really full, because you don't want to start a long endurance, intense race with glycogen reserves that are not completely full. And in the morning of, make sure you're also eating more carbs to make sure that overnight, whatever glycogen was depleted gets repleted. So if you're doing long, intense exercise, don't do that fasted. I mean, you can, but if you do that fasted, your performance is just not going to be as good because there'll be way less glycogen around to help you and to fuel your muscles as you're doing the exercise. So let's look at what to eat during intense exercise depending on the duration of that intense exercise. If the intense 85% VO2 max or 85% heart rate exercise is less than 1 or 2 hours, like an intense, cardio HIIT gym class or something like that, you don't actually need to be eating during the exercise because you have enough glycogen to be able to help you perform for those 2 hours. So just make sure your glycogen reserves are full. And there's a really cool study that actually shows us A little trick if you want to increase your performance during short bursts of exercise like this. The study is called Carbohydrate Mouth Rinse and Spray Improve Prolonged Exercise Performance in Recreationally Trained Male College Students. And there's a meta-analysis also called Effect of Carbohydrate Mouth Rinse on Muscle Strength and Muscle Endurance, a systematic review with meta-analysis. And this review concludes carbohydrate mouth rinse has no effect on maximal muscle strength, but has a positive effect on muscular endurance. What is this mouth rinse? It's basically as simple as putting some liquid in your mouth that is sweet, so we're talking a glucose solution or some fruit juice, swishing it around for many seconds so that your body gets the message, oh, there's something sweet in this mouth, and then literally spitting it out. Just doing this can increase your performance by 3 to 7% in these short periods of intense exercise of less than 2 hours. This is so cool. You don't actually have to swallow the glucose or the sugar. Just by swishing it around, your body and your brain think, oh, cool, there's some sugar coming, there's some glucose coming, so I don't have to decrease how much we can push during this 1 or 2 hours. So test it. If you're somebody who does like boot camps or HIIT classes, have a little swish during the class. And by the way, you can swallow it. That's fine. That doesn't actually change anything, whether or not you swallow it. But you really have to make sure you're swishing the solution around in your mouth for a little while, like 5 to 10 seconds, to make sure your body gets that signal. So for anything less than 2 hours, this is what you should be doing. Otherwise, you can just eat normally, make sure you're having carbs the night before, refueling normally. You don't have to do anything special. Your body will be fine and able to handle it. So around 2 hours, between 2 and 3 hours of intense exercise, this is when your glycogen reserves are really going to start dropping. And again, at this intensity, your body is burning glucose for fuel. So it's a good idea to refuel and to make sure you're eating a little bit in that 2 to 3 hour mark. You can just have a glucose gel or something like that. And yes, here you want to actually swallow the carbs. It's not tricking your brain that you're trying to do. We're actually trying to give our muscles external glycogen to be able to perform. Now, once we get past the 2 to 3 hour mark, this is when usually athletes will hit what's called the wall. So the wall is a feeling of not having enough fuel anymore and your body just saying, I can't keep up this pace. I cannot keep up this level of performance. I no longer have energy. I no longer have fuel. So if you're not refueling properly, if you're not giving your body external sources of glucose during a very long, prolonged, high-intensity exercise like this, your body will say stop. So it's super key to actually give your body external sources of glucose to be able to keep performing. And at this level of 85% VO2 max, somebody is going to be burning about 120 to 180 grams of glucose per hour. So you might think, oh, that's fine. I'll just eat that much every hour to make sure my body has enough fuel. This is the problem. You cannot absorb that much glucose. Now we're going to get into exactly what kind of carbs you should be eating to try to get that absorption up. But essentially, your intestines and your stomach and your whole gut can only absorb about 60 grams of glucose per hour. So that causes a problem, right? If you're burning 150 grams of glucose per hour and you can only absorb 60 grams of glucose per hour, now you're kind of in a pickle. But scientists discovered something really cool. They saw that yes, an athlete can only absorb 60 grams of glucose per hour, but in addition to 60 grams of glucose, they can absorb also another sugar called fructose. They can absorb about 30 grams of this fructose per hour in addition to the 60 grams of glucose. And so when an athlete is doing intense exercise and eats fructose, their liver will transform the fructose into glucose to be able to fuel them. So you get to about 100 grams of available glucose to be used per hour if you're eating enough of it. And the studies are pretty clear on this. You'll find a lot of studies, like a great paper called A Step Towards Personalized Sport Nutrition, Carb Intake During Exercise. And they show that having both this glucose and fructose during long exercise will give you a lift. 75% more glucose burning, more power output, and in cyclists, reduce time in the races. So how to consume this? This is up to personal preference. You can do drinks, you can do gels, you can do solids. Just make sure if you're having like a solid bar to also drink water, because they can be quite dehydrating. But essentially, you can aim for a glucose-fructose mixture to get you to about 100 grams of glucose overall that are available for your muscles. Now, importantly, if you're not doing 4 hours of intense cycling, if you're not doing 4 hours of long running, you don't need to be eating all this glucose and fructose, and specifically, you don't need to be adding fructose, because outside of the context of exercise, having too much fructose in your diet is actually detrimental. It's actually bad for you. It turns into a bad fat. But it's very different in the context of long endurance, intense sports. Okay? Now let's talk about post-exercise. How do you refuel your body? How do you replenish your glycogen reserves? And here, the answer is similar for all of us. Unless you need to replenish really, really quickly because you just did a marathon and you have to do a second one in like an hour, you don't need to be eating a lot of fructose. You don't need to be eating a lot of sugar. You can simply replenish by eating good for you carbs, by using my glucose hacks of the veggies first before you eat the carbs to replenish your glycogen reserves. You do not need to replenish after intense, prolonged exercise with cookies, with fast food, with ice cream, with chocolate, with sugar. You do not need to do that. And that could actually have some negative consequences, because if you eat a lot of sugar, it's going to create a big glucose spike and then a big glucose drop. Not only does the big glucose spike create inflammation in your body, that drop is going to make you tired. So if you've just done a lot of exercising for a long period of time, think about having a meal like a big rice dish, some nice protein with it, and a veggie starter also to help your body absorb the glucose in that rice or that starch more slowly. Because after exercise, your body is very insulin sensitive, meaning it will very rapidly absorb glucose that you're eating in starches to replenish the glycogen reserves in your body. So you don't need to be having 35 cookies at once. You can have a totally normal meal with a nice veggie starter, some protein, and then a lot of starches. There's a difference, you really don't have to refuel with a bunch of candy and stuff like that. You can refuel with a normal, healthy meal that doesn't create a glucose spike. And if you're like, what's a veggie starter? I have a PDF with some free veggie starter recipes in the description of this episode, so go have a look at those. They'll teach you basically very simple dishes you can put at the beginning of a meal to slow down the glucose spike from the starches that you will be eating in order to refuel, so that the glucose arrives more slowly and you're refueling without creating big glucose spikes and big glucose drops. And now, last question I want to address. I often get asked, how do you adapt my glucose hacks if you're an athlete? So if you're an athlete and you have to make sure your glycogen reserves are always full, make sure that your breakfast contains starch and fruit, right? Because in a savory breakfast, I explained that the starches in the fruit are optional, which is the case for most of us. But if you're going to go do 4 hours of intense exercise at 10 a.m., you have to make sure there's some good amount of starch and, for example, fruit in that breakfast to replenish your glycogen reserves. And then, honestly, apart from upping the amount of starches after exercise in order to refuel, you can use all the same hacks. Again, reducing glucose spikes is helpful for everybody, whether or not you're an athlete. Just in the case of being an athlete, make sure you're adding a lot of starch and fruit, for example, for those glycogen reserves. So I hope that was useful, and I will see you in the next episode about protein intake. So before and after intense exercise, how do you make sure you're eating enough protein so that you maintain and build your muscle mass? And this is key not just for performance, but also for longevity, for feeling amazing, and for aging in a really healthy manner. I'll see you there.